the thing about it is here in America is we have this like dumpy minimum wage. So there's this social pressure to tip because they depend on your tip.
In my mind, it should be a bonus that you get for extraordinary service and not something you're entitled to because you've done the job that you do.
Like service industries, I guess, is basically what people think of, but you don't tip your McDonald's cashier or...
Usually you're tipping the server, like the person that's handing you the product at the end, but it ignores all the people behind the scenes.
Welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Casey Rochford.
And I'm Eric Rosenblatt. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And we write our own music, so stick around to the end of the episode. And if you feel like supporting the show, go to patreon.com/KSMvidcast and share a little love in the form of money. So Casey, what do you think we should talk about today?
Well, as I pour this very rare and expensive Rochefort beer,
Nice.
It reminds me that if you come across this beer, like you can get this beer for like $7 or something in a store if you find it in a store, but if you find it at a restaurant, you're going to pay like $12 to $15 a bottle for that thing.
Dang.
It's a good beer, but you know, that really got me thinking about the whole concept of tipping in America and a few other countries. It's all based on like percentages. So if you like get an expensive meal or something and a nice beer, you're going to end up tipping more. But is that guy or gal working any harder than the one at the diner? You know, and it just got me thinking, is it really fair the way we tip?
Oh man, that's a good one. I mean, you know, this could probably go down a lot of... Hang on, I got a cat that needs a little attention here. He doesn't get tips.
Except I got my cat too.
Yeah. Why don't you introduce your cat and I'll introduce mine? So, Floyd. Oh, yep, that's it.
Yeah, that's enough cats for now. Enough cats on the internet.
Yeah.
So what were you saying?
Sorry, I got distracted by the cat there as usual. You know, yeah, the tipping is kind of a weird practice. I mean, cat's reaching for my face.
Well, you know, the thing about it is here in America is we have this like dumpy minimum wage. So there's this social pressure to tip because they depend on your tip. So,
well, and that's an interesting thing too, because I don't know, maybe it was like a century ago or something like that. There was a law passed that excluded minimum wage for tipped industries like restaurant workers and things like that. And I guess, you know, I've heard varying figures, but some people, you know, the numbers are like a couple bucks an hour if you get tips. That's the wage that you get. And hang on, I've got an intruder here.
Are you talking about, because I mean, a century ago we didn't have the minimum wage, right?
Yeah, like about a century. I mean, you know, 30s or 40s, I think it was, somewhere around there.
Yeah. So I think what you're talking about is certain states, I think Arizona does this or something, they are allowed to pay the servers or whoever gets tips, they're allowed to pay them the federal minimum wage, which is basically always lower than a state's minimum wage,
Mm-hmm.
um, as far as I know. So
Yeah.
yeah, it can be
Well,
pretty hard for them to get by in certain states. That's for sure.
so what I'm talking about here is this. Sorry, this cat is going to be all up in my face here. The This is based around the idea that the cumulative wages, including tips, equal the minimum wage. So if you say bring in a few dollars an hour in tips, they can deduct that from your wages and say, "Oh yeah, you make the minimum wage," because
Oh, like
the
they're not
tips
allowed to
equal
make
it out.
excess of it or something.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know if I've ever heard that, but that would be kind of screwy. I mean, I guess it's not unheard of though, because there's some sales jobs where you get a base pay or commission,
it,
like that sort of thing.
it's very much like that actually. So if your wages plus tips equals the minimum wage, you're good. And if it doesn't, if you're below that, then the employer is supposed to make up the difference. And there's some
That's even
shady
crappier than the
things.
sales job, because at least with the sales job, if you sell a lot, you have the option to make more than the base pay. So
Yeah,
I don't know
I
about
mean,
that.
we could probably go into the minimum wage at some point. Like that's actually its own episode. I think like
Oh yeah, yeah,
it's totally separate conversation. You
yeah.
know, but
I think what I
it,
really want to dive into with this is maybe like the way other, not even countries, but other cultures look at tipping, like um, like take Asian and Australian countries and cultures in that region of the world. It's very much, I think, logical. It's like, we don't expect you to do this, but if you think the service is excellent, it's welcomed, you know. Except with maybe a few places like Japan and China where it's seen as rude to tip, but it's really easy to piss people off in Japan. So,
that's true. Yeah,
um,
yeah. It is kind of weird. This kind of expectation that you're going to get a tip in the U.S. I can speak for the U.S.
U.S., Canada,
There,
it's pretty similar.
yeah, there's kind of this expectation that if you do a job, whatever job it is, that you're going to get a tip, and gratuity percentages are like 10 to 15%. It's kind of expected, but it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, in my mind, it should be a bonus that you get for extraordinary service, and not something you're entitled to because you've done the job that you do. Because think about it, like in what other industry do you get a tip? Uh, Some, but what if?
Yeah,
Sorry,
but
go ahead.
there's like hotel services and stuff, which
Yeah,
I honestly probably they don't even get tips all that often. And then like barbers, it wasn't even on until I was bald. It wasn't even on my radar that you're supposed to tip a barber. So I had this hair down to my waist, and those poor barbers were not getting tips from me, and I just know.
well, yeah, it is. It is a little bit strange the discrepancy there. That if you do one thing, you get a tip, and if you do a different thing, you don't. Like, why?
Yeah, it's
Tradition or something?
well,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
I mean, there's certain like service industries, I guess, is basically what people think of, but you don't tip your McDonald's cashier, or
no.
like, or it's not very common to anyway. I mean, you certainly could, I'm sure. Actually, they might have
Yeah,
policies against accepting tips because some
they
do.
might, but yeah, you. you got a good point there. You go into McDonald's or Burger King or something like that, and they're just doing their job and they give you the food and it's all good. You don't give them a tip. But somehow when you're brewing coffee, you get a tip.
Mm.
Where does I don't understand the difference between those things, you know?
Well, yeah, and like I said at the head of the show, it's like, what's the difference between the diner coffee brewer or the guy bringing you a 5-star meal that costs $75 or something? Like,
Yeah.
he's going to end up with, like here in America, we're approaching like upwards of 25% as the acceptable tip percent. Like it used to be like 10%, and now we're like creeping up to a quarter of your bill.
Well, and it's all ridiculous too, because when you give somebody a tip, usually you're tipping the server, like the person that's handing you the product at the end, but it ignores all the people behind the scenes. That's kind of like if you only congratulated the astronauts that landed on the moon and ignored the probably thousands of people behind the scenes that made it happen. Everybody contributed. So how come the person that delivered the end product gets all the goods? It makes no sense.
Yeah, that's true. When I was a cook back in the 90s, most of my jobs I didn't regularly get tips. Sometimes people would earmark it specifically for the chef or whatever, and they'd come back and say, hey, this person liked their meal, they wanted to give you some cash. And that would happen from time to time. But then I did work at a few restaurants, even back 20 years ago, that had GTO, general tip out. So the servers would collect their tips and then they would report it to their manager. The manager would divvy it up on like a pie slice sort of situation. So the cooks would get some, the bussers would get some, the dishwashers would get some. Everybody who contributed in some way, large or small, did get paid. And I think a lot more places are doing that now, actually.
Well, and that does actually make a little bit of sense, but how do you account for things like, say, what if all of the staff except the bussers did a spectacular job? What if everybody, either dishwashers or somebody just slacked? And
Yeah.
so
yeah, it's
dividing
not
it up
really
evenly.
service based. It's
Yeah.
not service based at all anymore. It's just kind of obligatory.
Well, and that is a problem. I because it's sort of like seen as this kind of like an entitlement. And I don't know. Yeah, oh man.
I mean, yeah, you're right. It is seen as an entitlement, which kind of sullies it a little bit. It makes it feel
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm not really like patting them on the back with this, even though I might want it to be taken that way. But then it's like, do I have to just shell out like a 40% tip to look good or whatever? It's like, I I can't afford that, and people that say if you can't afford to tip, you shouldn't eat out. It's like, well, maybe we should just be paying them better and then we can tip them however much we want. Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, that's a good point. And in fact, some states in the U.S. have restricted tipping, and a lot of countries don't tip. It's not customary to tip people in service industries like food service.
Yeah, well,
And
like many countries, if you do tip on the rare occasion, it's because they did a really awesome job.
yeah,
And
that's
then
what it
it's like,
should be.
and then it's like 5 or 10%.
Yeah, yeah. Here's a little bit of extra for the above and beyond you've gone, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. But it's become a point of dependency at this point, in at least in the U.S. And
Yeah.
so, what do you think if we did decide tipping is ridiculous and we should just do away with it? Is it okay to say all right, well, all the people working in the food service industry, let's say, as an example, get paid the regular full pay that any other person doing a job gets, but your prices are a little bit higher as a consequence. I mean, maybe
I
that's
mean,
okay.
yeah, I would be fine with that if the culture uh, followed suit. If the culture was like, okay, we can kind of ease back on the percentage of tipping now because people are getting livable wages or whatever, that would be fine, because it's all going to be a wash in the end, really. Like if you pay uh, $5 extra for your dish, that was the $5 you were going to leave for the server or whatever. It's it's all a wash. But basically, then at least they have, like, you know something that they can depend on. If there's a slow week or whatever and they don't get a lot of tips, then they're struggling for rent. If they just have a regular paycheck that they can depend on and budget stuff with, like, it would
Yeah.
be better for the economy on the whole.
Well, I don't know if I would completely agree with that, but you're right. Yeah. If you have something predictable that, regardless of the highs and lows, you're getting the same pay for doing work and being there and things like that. I think that's valuable. And there's a lot of countries or different places, industries that do that. So
Mhm.
it is kind of weird. Like, why do we tip here but not there? You know, it's kind of strange. Like, I don't get it. Like you talked about, like, you go to a sit down restaurant, like a restaurant that you have a menu that somebody hands you and you order things. But if the menu's
Real
on,
cloth napkins and
yeah, but if the menu's on a backlit board or it's a LCD or something on the wall, suddenly that changes. I don't, why.
yeah, that's a weird psychology. um
Yeah. And then there's so many other service industries that don't tip, that it's not expected. And
yeah.
it's really weird. Yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah, and like, you usually, when you go get a coffee or a latte or whatever, you'll throw a tip on at your local coffee shop. If you're paying with a card, you can do that. Every time I go to Starbucks, they take my card and they run it and they hand the card back with a receipt. There's not even a place to put a tip on there. It's like, do they not do tips at Starbucks? I'm not sure
I,
about that.
I think they do.
Like, they kind of make
Maybe.
it hard to tip almost. Like,
Yeah, well, Starbucks is a little bit more like McDonald's in
hmm
terms of coffee. If you go to like a little stand or something like that, or one of the coffee places that the the people making the coffee wear next to nothing, tipping is encouraged. Um, and but it is kind of a strange concept. Like, I think, to me, if I go to a store, let's just use like Walmart as an example. I go into Walmart, I see some product, like, I don't know, I need uh, some pencils or something like that, and it says $1.25, and that's the price that I think I'm going to pay. Um, why is it different when somebody, there's a bunch of people behind all of that, stocking the shelves and cashiers and things like that? There's no expectation of anything extra, but once you cook something or you brew a coffee or something, it changes. Why? I don't
yeah,
understand that.
I I think it might be the level of um, personal interaction. It's like they're directly taking care of you. They're following your orders. They're, you know making it nice and cushy for you. Um, but I've always wondered, like, is there a better way to tip? Have you ever thought about that? Like, if you were the culture king of America and you said this is the way it's going to be now, we're going to tip in this manner. What would you do?
Well, I think tipping should be a bonus. Like I said earlier, you know, the price on the board that you see is the standard price. If somebody goes above and beyond and gives you exceptional service, like, you know, let's say there's a problem and they solve it, um, or it's an especially difficult thing to do, or something like that, you know, something extraordinary, that's when you give them a little bit extra. You're like, hey, you know what? The price on the board said $9.99, but you did all of this stuff to make my life better as a customer. So here's a little extra for your trouble. And I think that's fair. But it's not like that anymore. It's kind of like people are dependent on it, and that's not good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not like that anymore in our country. Australia is pretty much still that way, a lot of Europe. But I've always thought, so having worked in the service industry, I've busted my ass. I was a cook for the most part. I did a little bussing here and there, but there were days, um, like during the lunch rush, we had myself and one waitress, and it would get really busy, and she would just lose her head. She was like, "I can't handle this," and I was like, "All right, hey, I'll take a couple of tables off your hands, and so I would run back, cook all the food, and then put hers up in the window, and I'd take mine and I'd go out and I'd serve people, in my nasty old apron and stuff. It was a lunch rush, and there was a lot of running back and forth and stuff, and I would get tipped out or whatever. But I started to think, even way back then, um, some of this isn't actually that hard. Like, I could do this. I could run back and forth, except for a few certain types of patrons. And, you know, they're the coffee campers or whatever, or the real problematic, nitpicky kind of people that want everything changed just so. And they stick around for like 2 hours using up your real estate that other people could be in there paying money to use. And I kind of wonder if it would be better if our culture just shifted towards tipping based on how much of a pain in the ass you are or how long you stay.
Well, that does require a little bit of introspection.
Yeah.
Most people don't think they're a pain in the ass, even though most people are. But that is a good point.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm a regular at a restaurant and I'll walk in, I'll be like, I don't need a menu. I just want, this and a coffee or whatever. And like, okay, hon, I'll be right back, and bring the food out super quick, and I eat it. And they're like, you want any more coffee? I'm like, nah. And they just zoom right past. It's super easy. It's like I was never there.
Yeah.
People like that are a breeze. Like, if they left you $2, you probably wouldn't care because they come back every day. They're regular customers. You can depend on them. They're easy.
Yeah, predictable.
Yeah.
So you already know what to expect.
Yeah. So it's like, I don't know that people should really like get expectant or butthurt if there's kind of like a low tip, because I mean, especially like a generational thing. Like, I know my parents are kind of in this kick of like $3 or $4 for a tip, like no matter what the bill is.
Huh.
And that's just kind of like a baby boomer thing, I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
some people have probably adapted, but I just think that that's kind of a throwback to the way things used to be. Is like, oh well, here's my gratitude or whatever, and it's not based upon how much I spend or how long. Definitely not based on how long they stick around, because they like to talk, and we can be there for several hours sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's just there's a lot of different tipping styles, and I don't know that any of them are necessarily wrong, but there's this culture that makes you feel ashamed if you're not tipping like half your paycheck every time you go eat, you know?
Yeah, kind of societal norms and stuff. Kind of like how, if you're getting engaged, you're supposed to spend, what is it, 2 months of your pay on a diamond ring or something, which is a De Beers thing, and it's a scam. By
Yeah.
the way, we'll do an episode about that one because juicy one. Yeah,
Valentine's Day was invented by banks.
yeah. I, yeah, to me, tipping is something you do when somebody does something way over the top. They've gone above and beyond, and they've done something abnormal in a good way. You know, I would feel inclined to tip anybody anywhere, give them a little bit of extra money if they do something good, or if they're exceptionally nice or something, or that kind of thing. But just because, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
But our whole society, well, at least certain industries are built around that. Pizza delivery and
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like
stuff like
remember delivering pizzas in the snow, and it was like sometimes people would give you $2 or something, and you're like, really?
yeah. So yeah, exactly. When I
I'm
was
out here
delivering,
risking my life for your fucking pizza.
yeah, when I was delivering pizza for a company, I won't say their name, but it starts with a D and it ends with Omino's. Um, um, they so I had a delivery, and there was this torrential rainstorm, like streets flooded, all kinds of stuff. It was complete pandemonium, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. It was crazy. But I got this order to deliver a pizza to this house, and it, as I stepped out of my van, I stepped into like a foot and a half of water. And I'm just sloshing around, and I get the pizza up there, and I knock on the door, and this kid answers, and he's like, "Mom, the pizza guy is here." And then the mom comes up. The kid starts giving the mom shit for ordering pizza in the weather, because he's like, "This is crazy. How'd you make this guy come out like this? This is insane." And I think I got like a dollar or a 50-cent tip or something for that. Like,
Oh, man.
it's like, yeah. The interesting thing too, just to give a few more anecdotes about that, I delivered pizza in the north end of Tacoma, and I remember delivering to a probably $1 million house with columns and all this stuff and everything, just delivering pizza. They gave me $1 tip. I remember it was exactly $1. Then I went to uh, delivered to this really not really well-to-do apartment complex on G Street, in downtown Tacoma. It was kind of not really that nice of a place. And this old guy answered the door, and talked about how he used to deliver pizza and stuff. He gave me a $5 tip.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's interesting. This like $1 million house gave me $1, and this old guy in this ghetto apartment gave me $5. Yeah, it was kind of
I,
strange.
I also worked for a pizza delivery place that started with a D, and it ended in Omino's as well. Uh, and there was this one time in the North Tacoma area, a couple of young girls in a pretty ritzy house had ordered a pizza, and they paid with $100 bill.
Wow.
And you're not supposed to accept those, but it's like I had enough tips or something to cover the change. They didn't leave any tip. and then I got like chewed out. I guess I can't remember. Maybe it was counterfeit or something. Anyway, the next day I was delivering and I saw that house on fire, and I was kind of like,
Karma.
yeah, I had nothing to do with it.
Oh man. Yeah. Man, that is
But
the one thing that I think is good about tipping, good for the um, employee and not good for the state, is that if you get cash tips, it's expected that you're going to report them, but you don't necessarily have to. So
nobody does.
no,
No.
yeah, exactly. So you could save on taxes in that regard. I'm not saying I did anything like that because I'm an upstanding citizen. And I always follow the law. But, some people tend not to report their tips as income. And it was nice, I have to say, having, like $20, $30 in your pocket every night and cash.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a benefit in that regard, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, times are changing, and the dynamics of living expenses. Things tend to have to catch up with one another. So I kind of understand why uh, this whole social movement towards higher tips is occurring, but there are certain demographics, like here in Seattle, we have like a $15 minimum wage just in the city, and um, people still tip as normal. So these people are making, a livable wage or whatever, and they're getting these big fat tips on top of it. And the house is charging like a certain percent to cover the costs of the minimum wage. And it's like more money is just coming out of the consumer's pocket. And it's just in this weird state of flux where things aren't really getting better, I think.
Yeah, probably not. I know that a few states have restricted tipping, like banned it essentially, and the industry didn't really fall apart. I mean, though it's probably likely there were some effects, because food service operates on razor thin margins. So if you raise the cost, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. Um,
I mean, I think it's fine to be, grateful for somebody serving you. I think that's a good thing.
yeah,
I don't think I think it's tacky to place obligations on it, or expectations, I should say,
yeah, I
um,
totally agree.
because you're
That
not really obliged, but like you might get crappier service if you're not a good tipper, the next time you come in and stuff like that. And I
well,
think there's even a country where you tip before you get seated, like you're
what?
greasing the palms, you know?
Well, there's a little merit to that, I guess.
Yeah,
But then, what if they give you bad service? How do you retract that tip? You
right.
can't, So
You spit on your empty plate and oh well,
yeah.
that won't work.
Oh man, yeah. That
I mean,
it.
that's probably a pretty good like overview of the whole tipping situation. And I'd really love to hear people's input on how they tip, how they think people should be tipping. Have you worked in the service industry? Do you just have empathy for the service industry, or do you not care at all? Are you a $2 tipper kind of person?
Hmm.
I'd love to hear all kinds of thoughts about this, because people get really heated about this one. Really
Yeah, they
heated.
do. Yeah,
Yeah.
and Now, there is something we haven't touched on, which I think might have to be its own completely separate conversation, but there might be some racist origins for tipping, as there is for the minimum wage. Um, well, that's
I don't know about this.
yeah, yeah, it's a completely different conversation that we'll have to go into.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if you do a little digging, you'll find out about that. But yeah, definitely, I'd like to hear people's views on that, tipping in general, what they think about it. And like you said, if somebody's worked in the industry, what are your experiences, your thoughts on such things? And we will definitely have to do a follow-up on this.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
especially with that racist angle, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I encourage everybody to look up Walter Williams and some of his books and discussions. Like, he's got some insights into many things, including this particular subject. But yeah, keeps conversation going, and definitely throw us your ideas on this particular topic. Love to hear more.
Like, share, subscribe, and definitely thank you very much, Deep Sink Diving. Here's a tip. A great song on the way out.
All right, have a good day, everybody.